Welcome to the Arlington Street Church podcast. Founded in 1729, Arlington Street continues today as a gathering place for progressive people of faith in the greater Boston area and beyond. We are located at the corner of Arlington and Boylston Streets, across from the Public Garden in Boston, Massachusetts. Please visit ascboston.org for more information about this historic Unitarian Universalist congregation. Arlington Street Church, gathered in love and service for justice and peace.
Good morning. I haven't been up here before. I'm starting to get a nosebleed. You know, like this is pretty high. So, my name is Pat Scanlon, and many of you know me as Connie Scanlon's husband or David Scanlon's dad. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I recently returned to Vietnam for a 2-week visit with a number of other Vietnam vets. It has been 54 years since I was last in Vietnam, under very different circumstances, as you can imagine. The trip was sponsored by Veterans for Peace. I've been a member of Veterans for Peace for many years, and as Ali said, I was a member of Vietnam Vets Against the War before that. And I was the head of the Boston chapter for 5 years. This was a very personal journey for me that I put off for many years, and it was long past due. One of peace, reconciliation, discovery, interaction, learning, and understanding. I'll be talking today about the legacy of war, specifically the Vietnam War. Every war has its legacy. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander of the U.S. forces during World War II, once said, and I totally concur, "I hate war, as only a soldier who has lived it can, as only one who has seen its brutality, its futility, its stupidity." That is war in a nutshell. The legacy of war in Vietnam is uniquely horrendous because of what we left behind. I was a little apprehensive and nervous when our plane landed in Hanoi. It was the first time I had boots on the ground in over 5 decades. As I walked out of the canopy leading from the plane, there were a few VFP members. I should add that there's a number throughout Vietnam of expats, ex-soldiers, airmen and sailors who have gone back and live there full time. It's where they live now. That's really incredible. There was a number of vets waiting for us, and from chapter 160 of Veterans for Peace in Hanoi. There was one Husky expat, David Clark. He was a former Marine who has lived in Vietnam now for over 12 years with Ushi, his Vietnamese wife. As I walked out of the canopy, he immediately walked up to me, and I didn't know what was happening, and gave me a big bear hug and said, "Welcome home." He could have just as easily said, "Welcome back." Regardless, that was an emotional moment right there, and that simple gesture set the tone for the rest of my visit. My anxiety disappeared, and for the next 13 days, I was immersed in a land and a people I did not recognize. In war, especially in Vietnam, everyone could be the enemy. In today's Vietnam, everyone can be a friend. This was not just a sightseeing trip. We were a delegation of returning warriors, now Veterans for Peace, led by Chuck Sarcey, who's the president of Veterans for Peace, Chapter 160 in Hanoi. Chuck is revered in Vietnam for what he has done over the past 30 years. Vietnamese and assisting Vietnamese in both his work on Agent Orange, making prosthetics for thousands without limbs, and starting an organization called Renew that started the education about unexploded bombs and finding and dismantling these bombs. Chuck was awarded the National Friendship Medal of the state of Vietnam, the highest honor for foreigners who have served the country. This award is equivalent to our country's Presidential Medal of Freedom. High-ranking officials throughout Vietnam know Chuck Sarcey, and those that we met greeted him with such honor and respect. It was really quite moving. We started our trip in Hanoi, the political capital, and then to Da Nang, which is the financial capital, then to Hue, which is the spiritual capital, and then down to Ho Chi Minh City, formerly known as Saigon, which many refer to as the Wild West. We visited many smaller communities along the way. We met with several high-ranking officials over the course of 2 weeks. To name a few, we met with the provincial governor of Quang Tri province and other leaders in Quang Tri. We met with Mark Knapper, the U.S. ambassador in Vietnam. We met with the former Vietnam ambassador to the UN, the former ambassador to the EU. We were now, who are now heads of organizations that we met with. We met with the Da Nang Veterans Association. There are over 30,000 members just in this one province, an additional 3,000 women veterans. We shared what we did in the war. We shared greetings and small gifts. We met with the leaders of VAVA, V-A-V-A, Vietnam Association for Victims of Agent Orange. Agent Orange contains dioxin. I should add that Monsanto, that made Agent Orange, knew how to neutralize the dioxin, but didn't do it because they wanted to get it out the door so fast. And it's a heating process. If they had put it through a heating process, our veterans and millions of people in Vietnam would not have been affected by Agent Orange, but they didn't do that. The U.S. spraying operations was known as Operations Trail Dust. Over 19 million gallons of Agent Orange, 19 million gallons, was sprayed throughout Vietnam. Many areas got sprayed numerous times, some up to 10 times. Agent Orange is a toxic herbicide and defoliant meant to deny the NVA and Viet Cong of cover. We met with organizations working with Agent Orange and the Vietnamese still suffering from Agent Orange. Exposure to Agent Orange can cause every type of cancer, birth defects, physical abnormalities, mental disorders, chloracne, spina bifida, megacephaly, et cetera, et cetera. It's an amazing list of conditions. We visited an orphanage, Chu Duc Sun Buddhist orphanage, with orphan children. It's the worst when it's children. It's really the worst. Many with disabilities. Many were abandoned and left at their doorstep. We visit the Peace Village at Tudu Hospital, which takes in abandoned orphans born with severe disabilities. All suspects of being caused by Agent Orange. I have held deformed children in my arms. I sat on the side of a bed with a child suffering from megacephaly. Megacephaly is the swelling of the brain. And his little body and his big head. And I just sat there with him and just held him and held his head. And then another child, when I walked in, he was so thin, so just skin and bones. And he just put out his hands like this wherever I went. So I picked him up and I walked with him the entire time we were there. I just held him because that's what he needed. And they go to this hospital for medical treatment, and rehabilitation, and vocational training. What an experience it was visiting these locations and interacting with the children and the veterans. 4.8 million Vietnamese were exposed to Agent Orange during the war. between 1961 and 1971. That's the time frame that they sprayed Agent Orange throughout Vietnam and other areas. Mostly the spraying took place in very poor areas in the northern part of Vietnam where the war was being fought. The dioxin found its way into the environment, into groundwater, streams, and rivers. 50 years later, it is still affecting crops and rice production. There have been numerous cases of fishermen catching deformed fish. Today, there are over 300,000 Vietnamese that have physical disabilities directly related to Agent Orange. That's today. That's 50 years later, over 50 years later. Some of these were so horrendous and grotesque deformities. 10 years ago, that number was 3 million. That is how many affected Vietnamese have died horrible deaths due to the exposure to Agent Orange. Disabilities related to Agent Orange are now passing on genetically to the third and into the fourth generation, and since the war ended. We visited a family affected by Agent Orange, and this was also sad. All these things were so sad. This was a family of 4, father, wife, and 2 sons. The father and youngest son, 15 years old, have serious physical disabilities and deformities due to the father's exposure to Agent Orange. The older son was not there. He was away at college. This son has not been affected by Agent Orange. And that's how it can happen genetically. It can affect one child and then skip and not affect the next child. It can affect one generation and skip and not affect the next, but then it can connect the next because it just is in our systems, in our genetics, and that's what happens. This was a very poor family. It had rained, and as we approached their house, we had to navigate some water and mud on the ground. I found a root around a tree and was the first person at the house. The father lay, if you can picture this, the father lay face down on the floor of the front porch, was just a little bit off the ground. He pushed himself up into, he's literally flat on the ground, legs out to the side, and it kind of looked like a frog, and he was just there, and his chest was on the ground. He pushed himself up with his legs and his arms like this, so he was just a little bit off the ground. And his wife came up behind him, and she had a little stool, and she put the little stool under his butt, then walked around to the front and picked him up and pushed him up like this so he could sit while the rest of the people came. So I watched that. Nobody else saw that, but that's what I saw. So let me find where I was here. And his teenage son came out. And I guess his teenage son stood behind the father. I guess he was in a special program at school. And both were grossly deformed. The son was wearing something like a sheet and had something sticking out of his back that I didn't see. But so I greeted both the father and the son by gently shaking their arms. The son had to drop out of high school because his memory has begun to decline. The mother was the only one supporting the family, taking care of their one cow and working in a neighbor's rice paddy. You can imagine how poor this family is. We found out while we were there that their oldest son was in college and wasn't affected, as I said, by Agent Orange. They needed $3,000 for their son to finish college. He would then become the main income earner to support the family. Our group decided to give this family the $3,000. The local chapter will handle the money and disperse it as it's needed. We met with 2 U.S. military personnel responsible for repatriating U.S. military missing in action when remains are located. This is the shirt that they gave me when I was there. We have 1,700 MIAs. Vietnam has 200,000 MIA. We are starting to assist the Vietnamese in finding their MIAs. 58,000 U.S. service personnel were killed in Vietnam. Over 100,000 remained. The Vietnamese lost over 1 million regular soldiers killed and 100,000 Viet Cong killed. Vietnam also lost 3 million civilians. 60% of these were killed by the air campaign, of which I was intricately involved. What I was involved with in 1969 is still killing people today. That is the basis for my PTSD with moral injury. Quang Tri Province is where most of the fighting took place during the Vietnam War. It's the uppermost province that was once South Vietnam. It contains the DMZ, which we visited. Quang Tri Province is about the size of Rhode Island and has the distinction as the most bombed place on Earth. The U.S. dropped more than 7.5 million tons of bombs on Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Just as an aside, those strikes in South Vietnam were planned in out-country targets or in-country targets across the hall from where I was. All the bombing in Laos and then in Cambodia were planned in my office. So, 6 million tons of bombs were dropped in Vietnam alone. This is double the amount dropped in all of World War II. This was the largest aerial bombardment in human history in a relatively small area. Quang Tri is where the search for unexploded bombs began and is still taking place. These are incredible numbers when you really think about it. You know, usually when a war is over and it's over, and you close the door and, well, no, the war's not over because of what we left behind. And over 105,000 Vietnamese had been killed or maimed since the end of the war. Over 40% killed, 60% maimed in the past 50 years, and it continues today. We met with the groups responsible for finding and deactivating found unexploded bombs, UXBs. They have been at this for over 20 years and started by my friend Chuck Sarsi, and have deactivated, ready for this, over 800,000 bombs they've deactivated. There are millions of bombs that have yet to be found. The estimate is it will take, and this came right from there, right from the headquarters of people who are doing this now, and which is, the government is very involved in this. The estimate is it will take another 15 years. They have it all gridded out to find and deactivate the remaining bombs in just Quang Tri Province. Now, when they find the big boys, the ones that I worked with, they go in and deactivate them. When they find smaller bombs, they go and explode them in place. Grenades and bomblets and any other thing that, you know, so. We were told that it will take up to, here's another one, 270 years to clear all the UXBs in all the other provinces. They haven't even started in the other provinces. They're just starting now with starting Renewist opening up another office in the province next to Quang Tri. Throughout the country, they have had extensive educational programs about UXBs, again, started by Chuck Sarsi, and what to do if a bomb is found. Because of this educational effort alone, only 3,000 Vietnamese are killed or maimed annually. And I heard it was between 3,000 and 5,000 given on what the, so Anyway. Other provinces are now learning how to disarm bombs, and Renew is opening another location in another province. Keep in mind, this is 50 years after we left. There's so much work still to be done. During my trip, I met several people missing limbs from UXBs. The North Vietnamese feared B-52 strikes more than any other weapon in the US arsenal. When I was in the Army, I was in military intelligence, J2. I held a top secret clearance and was an intelligence analyst. I was in Targets Division for B-52 strikes at MACV headquarters in Saigon. Just an addition, my bomb damage assessment was a little section that we were in out-country targets. This is the upper echelon of military command. General Abrams, the commanding general in Vietnam, was 10 doors down from our office. The team I was on planned all the B-52 strikes throughout South Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia for the year of 1969. We were not bombing in the north that year. 1969 saw the highest concentration of B-52 bombings in South Vietnam of the entire war. I personally did all the bomb damage assessment on every B-52 strike in 1969. In that year alone, we dropped another staggering number. We dropped 3.5 million bombs in South Vietnam, 500 and 750 pounders. The 500 pounders were inside the fuselage. The 750 pounders were under the wings. Just another aside, a strike of a B-52, they fly at 25,000 feet. The target box is a half a mile long and a quarter mile wide. It consists of 2 waves. Each wave has 3 planes. First wave goes across and drops, and then 15 minutes later, the second wave. Each of those planes would carry between 86 and 102 bombs. Let's average it out, about 100 bombs apiece. About 600 bombs, 500, 750 pounders in that small area. Between 3 and 5% of all bombs, all explosives, did not explode. Do the math. In just 1969 alone, over 100,000 big bombs dropped by just the B-52s did not explode. Many are still out there waiting to either kill or maim unsuspecting civilians. Combine that number with all the combat sorties, naval bombardment, artillery rounds, bomblets, hand grenades, etc., there are still millions of unexploded bombs throughout Vietnam. We're talking about the legacy of the Vietnam War, unexploded bombs, and the aftermath of Agent Orange. You may ask, did we do any actual sightseeing and other touristy things? Well, we visited Ho Lo Prison, called Hanoi Hilton, where John McCain was held. Drove past the pond where John McCain was captured. We visited the National War Museum and the National Veterans Cemetery, which is like our Arlington cemetery that just goes on and on and on forever. We walked the bunkers of Khe Sanh, crawled through the Viet Cong tunnels in Chu Chi, visit the rock pile on Marble Mountain, sites of major battles. We spent a night on a junk in Ha Long Bay, one of the most incredible natural geological spaces on the face of the earth. We interacted with numerous Vietnamese, ate at Vietnamese outdoor eateries, got to see local neighborhoods. So much of Vietnam I did not recognize. The development in Vietnam has exploded over the past 20 years, especially in the past 10 years. There were skyscrapers. Now, I'm used to thatched huts. There were skyscrapers in every major city we visited. They have become a global manufacturing center, and their economy is booming. Although it is still a very poor, mostly rural country, it has become a major tourist destination for people from around the world. Vietnam is an exceptionally beautiful country from top to bottom, something I missed the first time I was there. There was nothing beautiful about Vietnam when I was there. Exquisite mountains and beautiful beaches. The Vietnamese people are beautiful, warm, friendly, and welcoming people. The Vietnamese are predominantly Buddhists. We visited Buddhist temples and Confucian temple. They also have Christian churches and a large Christian cathedral in Saigon. What I found was uniquely Vietnamese take on the war. Maybe it is based on their Buddhist religion. The Vietnamese will never forget their horrendous 20 years of war with the United States. 50 years later, the legacy continues. They do not want to look back and dwell in the past. They want to move forward in peace, reconciliation, forgiveness, friendship, and want to move into the future, working together for a positive, mutual beneficial future for all. I found this to be incredible after what we did to that country, what's still happening in that country. I told them at meetings what I participated in, and was greeted warmly, sometimes with hugs and friendship. And it's like, my God, didn't you hear what I just said? You know, I was part of the team that annihilated your country, and still I was greeted that way. I did not sense, even once, any feeling of resentment or hostility, only warm, friendly embraces. They constantly told us they want to move forward together in friendship. In conclusion, Vietnam is vastly different today than 50 years ago, and in some ways is very much the same. Over the past 30 plus years, we have built bridges from the ruins of war with bonds of friendship and respect forged in the past decades, bonds that reflect forgiveness and a determination to transform the sorrow and pain of war into a commitment to build peace and a hopeful future for next generations. For your information, President Biden visited Vietnam last September, the month before we were there. There are 4 levels of diplomacy. At the time, the US and Vietnam was on the lowest level. And initially, the US was going to propose bumping it up 1 level. While there, the decision was made to propose skipping 2 levels and proposing full normal diplomatic relations. Surprisingly, that proposal was accepted, and we now have full diplomatic relations with Vietnam. They're on the same level now as France and England. 2 US aircraft carriers, this is kind of unbelievable, have dropped anchor in Da Nang Harbor over the past year. We now actively helping to clean up Agent Orange hotspots. Da Nang Airport, where we visited Da Nang Airport, where many of the Agent Orange spraying flights originated, has been totally cleaned by the US. How they clean it is that there's a place, they built a place as big as this church, maybe bigger, and they dig up where the barrels were stored, all the contaminated Agent Orange, and all the dirt, and they put it in, and then they put rods in the ground, and they cook it. That's all Monsanto had to do, but they didn't do it. And that kills the dioxin. You put the dirt back, and it's not harmful any longer. So when we were there, the US had begun working on Benoit Air Base, located about 25 miles from Saigon. That's where I came into and left Vietnam, Benoit. There are 26 hotspots throughout Vietnam, and the US is cleaning them up, one at a time. There is now a lot of joint cooperation with Vietnam on a number of fronts. We have started a small effort to help Vietnamese who are suffering from exposure to Agent Orange. On a final note, the veterans on this trip jointly donated $20,000 to 6 of the programs we had visited, including the family I mentioned previously. VFP has conducted 6 of these trips for returning vets over the years and has donated over $350,000 to very deserving organizations. If anyone here, we're on Zoom, would like to donate to help these organizations, please contact Allie or me or my wife, Connie, and thank you for listening.
please visit ascboston.org for more information about this historic Unitarian Universalist congregation. Arlington Street Church, gathered in love and service for justice and peace.